At 2 a.m. the alley was silent, its walls slick with condensation, dumpsters lined against the brick. A patrol car nosed in, headlights washing the graffiti in harsh white. The engine idled low, the doors swung open. Boots struck pavement in sequence, 3 sets, the sound flat against wet asphalt. Jamal Harris, 17, stood pinned in the beam. His jacket half-zipped, sneakers untied, breath fogging in quick bursts. One officer barked, "Hands up." Another yanked his arm. The first slam came as his body hit the hood of the car. Metal rang sharp, a hollow crash that echoed down the narrow lane. "Stop, stop!" His voice cracked. Then louder, desperate, "Mama, I'm scared." The sound was swallowed by a baton striking ribs, a dull thud, then another. Radio static flared, a clipped voice cut through. "Unit 4, suspect resisting, copy." A flashlight beam jittered across the scene. It froze on Jamal's face, blood already tracing from his mouth. His cheek pressed against steel, breath smearing condensation across the hood. The baton lifted again. Impact. Bone gave under the weight, a snap clean enough to silence the alley for a second. Glass crunched under boots. The officers repositioned, forcing him down, one knee on his back. Sirens distant. Red and blue began to dance across the brick walls, spinning lights slicing the darkness into jagged fragments. "Stay down," one voice said. "He's not staying down." Another blow. The baton hit shoulder, slid to arm. Jamal convulsed, palms out, open, empty. His cry clipped short, breath stuttered. The radio crackled again. "Copy Unit 4, what's the status?" Static swallowed the rest. Close in, drops of blood spattered the pavement. They spread into a thin, reflective sheen under the strobing lights. A rivulet ran toward the gutter, mixing with rainwater. The flashlight followed it, beam steady, until it lost shape in the drain. Above, the officers moved in rhythm. One held wrists, another pressed his head sideways against steel. The third raised the baton higher, shoulders tense, shadow cast long against the wall. "Resisting," he muttered. Then the swing landed. The sound this time was heavier, a wet impact. Jamal's legs buckled. Sneakers scraped across the hood. The steel dented with a hollow pop. His face turned, teeth streaked red. He gasped. "Mama!" The word faded into the siren's wail. A bystander's cell phone camera caught the angle from the mouth of the alley. Frame shook as the baton came down again. The image cut across Jamal's face in blur. In the distance, a car horn blared once, then fell silent. One officer shifted, breathing hard. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Call it in." The flashlight dropped low. The lens focused tight on the boy's cheek, pressed flat, his eye swollen shut. Blood pooled beneath, dripping steady. Sirens closed in now, louder, sharp turns echoing off the blocks nearby. "Unit 4, respond. You need backup." No answer, only static. Then a short burst of breath into the radio, clipped words barely audible. "Suspect under control." Jamal's chest rose once, shallow. His hand twitched open and closed. The baton lifted again but stopped midair, frozen in the flash of approaching red and blue. The sound of another siren layered over the first, then another. The alley lit brighter, shadows shifting frantic. Cameras rolled from the corner store's mounted system. Timestamp 2:07 a.m. capturing every frame. Jamal pinned, bleeding, unmoving. Officers repositioning, adjusting grips. The metallic hood reflecting neon. The drain swallowing red. Then stillness. The air hung thick. Only the chorus of sirens outside the alley, growing louder, tighter, inescapable. The frame ended on Jamal's body, limp across steel, red and blue lights circling his face. The radio crackled once more, sharp against the silence. "Unit 4, do you copy?" The baton lowered slowly. No response. Only the hum of the idling engine, the drip of blood, the spin of sirens painting the bricks. But this was only the first blow in a war. The town sat low under heat and wires, a grid of short blocks and 2-lane roads, porches with paint flaking, storefront glass taped at the corners. On Main Street, the courthouse clock chimed 6 p.m. while a freight train rolled past the mill and rattled loose downspouts along Maple. Patrol cars idled outside the diner, white doors marked with a blue stripe and a crest. On the east side, shotgun houses leaned close together, mailboxes dented, plastic toys in yards. On the west, brick colonials trimmed hedges and clean gutters, flags neat against quiet lawns. The station sat between, brick and bright floodlights, a line of cruisers angled like teeth. Jamal Harris moved through this grid with a worn backpack and a basketball tucked to his hip. At 5 p.m. he had run drills on the cracked asphalt of the park court. The chain net hissed. Shoes squeaked. A radio on someone's bench coughed out a drum loop, then a DJ's laugh. A school trainer wrapped his wrist with white tape and said, "You good?" Jamal nodded. He stepped to the free throw line, bounced twice, lifted and released. The ball kissed iron and fell through. A kid on the sideline shouted, "College, bro." Jamal smiled without showing teeth. The park cam on the light pole panned past, caught the motion, then drifted away to the street. 7 p.m. he walked home along Linden. He stopped at the corner store for a sports drink and a bag of chips. The bell over the door rang dull. The clerk said, "What's up, Jay?" Fluorescence hummed. A convex mirror watched the aisles. The domed CCTV above the register blinked once and fixed on the doorway. The camera recorded his gray hoodie, the tape on his wrist, the smile he gave a toddler near the candy rack. He slid bills across the counter and left with a nod. The receipt timestamp reads 7:12 p.m. The Harris house sat near the end of a narrow cul-de-sac where asphalt crumbled into dirt. The porch light flickered. Inside the kitchen, a corkboard held a schedule scribbled in blue marker. College brochures were stacked under a magnet. A magnet shaped like a paw held his last report card. In the other room, a TV muttered about weather and a mayoral ribbon cutting. At 9 p.m., his mother, Alana, zipped her scrub top. She attached a badge to the pocket and tied her hair back. She hugged him by the door, one arm around his shoulders, the other holding a thermos. She said, "Lock it, okay." He said, "Got it." She stepped into the night. Car door thumped, engine turned, tail lights red against the curb. The clock on the stove marked 9:04 p.m. In the garage, his father, Calvin, had an old Chevy raised on stands. The concrete floor carried oil stains and boot prints. A shop light cast a lemon-colored circle. The air held gasoline, hot metal, and rubber. A small portable radio on the shelf slid from blues to soul, a low, warm groove. Calvin wore a gray shirt with his name stitched in red. He set a socket back into a tray. A framed photo of a much younger Calvin in uniform leaned on the pegboard. No captions. No dates. A torque wrench clicked. Jamal handed over a 14mm without being asked. He wiped grease off his palms with a rag and checked his phone. The clock read 10:26 p.m. They ate late at the kitchen counter. Chicken from a box, coleslaw in a paper cup. The TV showed a high school highlight reel. A local anchor said, "District playoffs next week." Calvin said, "Early night." Jamal shrugged. He rinsed plates in the sink and watched water cloud with soap. At 11 p.m. they turned off lights one by one. The porch light steadied and then dimmed again. On Fridays and some Tuesdays, the department made random checks at the east side corridor. Dashcam saw it. Blue text overlays marked dates. In one clip from 3 weeks earlier, a cruiser lit up behind Jamal's friend's sedan. The officer said, "Step out." The kid asked, "For what?" The reply came flat, "Description." They patted him down against the door seam, pulled a wallet, spread bills on the trunk. In another clip, timestamp 8:37 p.m., Jamal stood under sodium glow beside a lamppost, palms out. "ID," an officer said. Jamal handed over a school card. A flashlight beam traveled up and down his sleeves. The officer returned the card and said, "Move along." No citation, no reason given. Both clips ended on a turn signal ticking into the dark. Neighbors had their own angles. A porch camera captured two cruisers creeping slowly past at 1 a.m. 3 nights before the beating. The lights were off. The lenses recorded exhaust vapor and the shadow of antennas bending at low speed. A gas station camera caught officers laughing at 1:41 a.m. over styrofoam cups, one of them tracing circles on the counter with a gloved finger. The clerk slid scratch-offs across the glass. The register beeped, then closed. No one looked toward the alley that would matter. The town's divide showed up in little flashes. At the VFW, a row of framed photos over the bar. At the East Side barbershop, jerseys tacked to the wall, a flyer for a church vigil. Outside the hardware store, a blue-striped flag fluttered under a halogen flood. In windows along King Street, cardboard signs from last summer's march curled at the corners. In the diner at noon, two officers took the booth by the window. A waitress poured coffee and said, "You boys safe out there?" One officer laughed into his cup. The other watched a group of teenagers cross at the light, hoodies up against wind. On the Tuesday before, Jamal had been stopped near the rec center. A bodycam showed shoes, concrete, the hem of a hoodie. A voice said, "Where you headed?" Jamal answered, "Home. Empty your pockets." He turned them out, crumpled receipts, a key, a wristband from practice. The camera caught his face only in a quick upward tilt as he waited. He did not speak again. The clip ended with a "You can go." The day of the beating began the same. School, practice, home, the store, the hug at the door. At 10:58 p.m. a city traffic camera saw him at the corner of Linden and 6th, the crosswalk counting down from 9. At 11:15 p.m. a porch cam caught him jogging past, earbuds in, breath visible in bursts. At 12:02 a.m. a cruiser rolled slowly down the block opposite his street. It paused at the stop sign for 6 seconds, then turned. He left again near midnight, hoodie up, hands in pockets, headed toward the bodega for a late drink. The clerk from earlier lifted a hand through the glass. Another bell ring, another receipt. He stepped back into a night that had grown colder. The dome camera above the door followed him as far as the sidewalk, then reset to center. Inside, the cooler fan buzzed. Outside, the lot lay open except for a dented dumpster and a pallet leaning against the wall. Between the store and the alley, a single streetlight flickered and held. The alley entrance was narrow, framed by 2 buildings with peeling paint and a fire escape missing its bottom rung. Trash lids rattled once in a quick breeze. A motion detector on the corner kicked a small camera to life. Its LED went from dark to red. In the back office of the store, a DVR hummed, a green bar marching across a grid of black boxes labeled Cam 1 through Cam 8. Jamal passed the mouth of the alley at 1:58 a.m. A sedan turned off its headlights half a block away and slowed. A second cruiser rolled in from the opposite end and stopped in the space between the store and the fence. The alley took them both. In houses nearby, lights went out. Televisions muted. On Linden, a dog barked once and then twice. The train horn to the south moaned long and low. In the garage on the cul-de-sac, the radio on the shelf still played a bass line under static. A clock beside it showed 2 a.m. The town's cameras kept their fixed gaze, the porch lenses, the dashcams asleep in parked cruisers, the traffic pole eye that never dipped below the intersection. One eye alone looked directly into the narrow dark where metal would ring and voices would shout. It had already framed the hood of the patrol car. The batons, the flash of red and blue sliding across wet brick. It had a timestamp in the corner and a fan that rattled at every spin. The camera above the store's back door saw the alley clearly at 2:03 a.m. It recorded without sound. It did not blink. It saw everything. On the night of May 17, the air was heavy with exhaust and damp brick. At 1:59 a.m., a cruiser rolled slow down Linden, its headlights cutting before it reached the corner. A second unit angled into the alley from the opposite side, doors opening with quick metallic thuds. 3 officers stepped out, flashlights slicing across dumpsters, gravel, and walls. The beams locked on Jamal Harris. "Stop right there." The words were clipped, echoing against the brick. Jamal froze. His hands came up slowly, palms wide. Another voice followed, sharper. "Empty your pockets." He complied, receipts, a wristband from practice, a folded school ID. They hit the hood with a soft slap, a flashlight beam lingered on them. "Where's the dope?" Silence. Another voice, "We got nothing here." One officer muttered, "Check him anyway." Gloves snapped tight. Hands pressed against his jacket seams, his waistband, his shoes. Nothing. The frisk dragged long under the glare of the light, but the result was the same. Empty. Non-compliant, one officer said into the radio, static cracked. Possible possession. A baton tapped against the hood, then the slam came. Jamal's chest hit metal, head turned sideways, cheek pressed against steel. He gasped, "I didn't." The rest clipped off as the baton struck ribs. The alley filled with the sound of impact. A bystander at the far corner shouted, "He's just a kid." The voice carried above the sirens building in the distance. The officers turned their shoulders outward, pushing anyone with a phone back toward the street. "Move back," one barked. Another shoved a man holding up his camera. The image jerked, blurred, then cut. Jamal's arms were forced behind him, wrists bound tight. The zip tie snapped and locked. His hands jerked once, then stilled. His body sagged under the weight pressing down. A knee drove into his back. The radio cracked again. Unit 4, status check. The reply came short. Suspect resisting, requesting backup. A baton rose and fell. The impact echoed against the brick. Drops of blood hit the pavement, splattering into thin streams that spread toward the gutter. At 2:05 a.m., the corner store's CCTV caught the frame wide. The boy bent over the hood, 3 officers in a row behind him, batons swinging in sequence. His hands were open, spread out, palms up against steel. No weapon, no threat. Each blow landed harder than the last. The timestamp ticked seconds forward. A woman's voice cried from the sidewalk. "Stop, he's not fighting you." She was shoved aside, arm flailing into the frame before she stumbled out. The flashlight beam shook with every strike. Jamal's head jerked, his face swelling under impact. Teeth cracked, blood streaking across the hood's dent. He groaned low, then slumped. His knees buckled. His sneakers scraped against metal. One officer grunted, "Stay down." Another leaned close, voice harsh. "Don't move again." The bystanders pressed against the caution line drawn by the officer's stance. Phones rose, lenses glowing red. One officer swung his arm, knocking a phone from a hand. It clattered to the pavement. The screen stayed lit, still recording from the ground. The image showed only blurred legs and streaks of red. At 2:11 a.m., the alley echoed with the crack of another strike. The baton connected with his shoulder, then again with his skull. His body folded sideways, head striking the hood with a hollow clang. A final groan, then silence. His chest moved once, shallow, his eyes closed. "Call it in," an officer said. Another responded, "Already did." They lifted him roughly, dragging his limp frame upright. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and leaking blood down his chin. They pinned him against the cruiser door, cuffs now metal, not plastic. The officer keyed his mic. "Suspect secured. Transport required." The crowd's noise swelled. Shouts overlapped, some curses, some pleas. A man's voice cut sharp, "We got it on camera." A baton swung outward, shoving the crowd back another foot. The man staggered but held his phone high. The lens caught Jamal's face, slumped against steel, his body motionless, eyes closed. An ambulance pulled up at 2:19 a.m., siren cut as doors slammed. Paramedics rushed in, but officers blocked their first steps. "Wait." Tense words, then grudging clearance. The medic slid past, checked pulse, lifted his shirt, pressed pads to chest. One shook his head, whispered low. They strapped him to a gurney. His arms dangled limp. Blood dripped onto the stretcher, marking the vinyl in long streaks. He was loaded into the back. Doors clanged shut. Tires squealed against wet asphalt as the ambulance accelerated toward St. Mary's. The crowd followed with eyes and phones, their screens capturing flashing lights until they vanished around the bend. At 3:02 a.m., Jamal Harris entered the ER in critical condition. His chart logged trauma, skull fracture, multiple broken ribs, collapsed lung. Nurses rushed tubes, Roman 4 machines. His face swelled beyond recognition. Photographs later matched only by dental records. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered. Microphones clashed, cameras buzzed. One asked, "Did he have drugs?" A detective shrugged. "We're investigating." Inside the precinct, paperwork read, "Possession suspected. Suspect resisted." Boxes for evidence remained blank. The field test kit logged negative. At 8 a.m., a junior officer logged the evidence tray. Empty. By noon, footage began to circulate, not the official body cams. The corner store's CCTV. 31 seconds cut from a DVR, uploaded to a private server, then spread. The image showed Jamal's arms open, palms bare, body bent against steel, blows raining down until he collapsed. At 3 p.m., the first clip hit local news. The anchor's voice faltered once before continuing. "Tonight, questions are being raised." The screen replayed the loop again and again, each strike clear, each second undeniable. By evening, crowds formed outside the courthouse. Signs lifted, voices chanted. 17. Hands up. The sound grew into a chorus that echoed down Main Street. Police units lined the road, visors down, batons ready. At 9 p.m., the footage reached national feeds. Hashtags multiplied, clips replayed on every screen. The corner store owner told a reporter, "The camera doesn't lie." His words replayed in a loop, his face half in shadow. At midnight, the mayor held a press conference. He read from a sheet. "We ask for patience while we review." His voice trembled slightly under shouted questions. Back at the hospital, Calvin Harris stood in the hallway as machines hummed. Nurses adjusted monitors. Doctors moved quickly. The camera from a news crew caught only his shoulders slumped under fluorescent light as Jamal lay unresponsive beyond the curtain. The alley remained taped off for 2 days. White chalk marked where his blood had spread. A dent in the cruiser's hood remained visible under streetlight. Local kids lit candles there. Wax dripped along the curb. Cell phones glowed in hands as they replayed the same 31 seconds. The footage ran on loop in living rooms, on bus stop screens, across feeds. The image was the same. Jamal Harris, 17, hands open, body crumpling under strikes he never returned. And when the footage leaked, nothing was the same. At 10 a.m., the station lights glared hot against polished wood. Rows of microphones filled the podium. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, lenses pointed, red tally lights glowing. The chief cleared his throat. His tie was tight, his shirt collar stiff under sweat. "The officers acted according to protocol," he said. Flashbulbs cracked. Murmurs rippled across the room. A voice shouted, "Protocol for beating a 17-year-old." The chief didn't look up. He repeated, "Slower, protocol." The cameras caught his hand gripping the podium edge. At 10:11 a.m., the feed cut live to local stations. Across living rooms, the sentence scrolled in captions. Outside, a small group of residents held cardboard signs. Sirens cut through the background as more cruisers lined the street. At 11 a.m., the district attorney stood in front of another podium, this one draped with the state seal. His voice was flat. "We will conduct an internal review." He raised a folder, tapped its corner against the wood. "We ask for patience." A reporter called, "Will there be charges?" He didn't answer. He turned, walked out. His footsteps echoed against marble before the feed cut. By noon, 3 officers walked out of the courthouse side door. They wore civilian clothes, badges hanging from chains. Cameras rushed them. One shouted, "Why did you do it?" Another yelled, "Do you regret it?" One officer smirked, pulled sunglasses over his face, and said nothing. The door shut behind them. Court transcripts from that morning read, "Motion to dismiss criminal charges granted." The gavel struck once. The judge's voice carried across the chamber. "Bail is unnecessary. Officers are released." The sound of folding chairs and muffled shouts rose in the gallery before the bailiff ordered silence. By 2 p.m., local papers hit stands. The headline read in block type, "Teen attacked police first." Below it, a photo of Jamal cropped from a basketball game, his mouth open mid-yell taken out of context. The caption beneath, "Eyewitnesses claim teen resisted arrest." In small print, the article cited unconfirmed sources. At 4 p.m., the Harris family held a press conference on the church steps. Calvin stood behind microphones, Alana at his side, her eyes swollen red. He was 17. Calvin said he was unarmed. Cameras clicked, reporters leaned in, then the sound cut. The mic hissed, then went dead. Calvin's mouth moved, but no audio carried. Wires tangled at the base of the podium, plugs pulled. Reporters turned to technicians who shrugged. The feed ended abruptly. At 6 p.m., a newscaster announced, "Technical difficulties cut the Harris family press conference short." The screen replayed only the first 10 seconds. Calvin's words, he was 17, looped again, then faded to static before weather updates. On the west side of town, posters appeared with a still frame of the alley beating. The grainy black and white showed Jamal's open hands against steel. Beneath, spray-painted letters read, "Truth." By evening, most posters were torn down. At 8 p.m., the girl who had recorded the beating on her phone was reported missing. Her name appeared in the evening news ticker. Local teen, 19, not seen since 3 p.m. Police declined to comment. Her phone last pinged near the river bridge. At 9:15 p.m., her cousin posted on social media. She had the real video. The post was removed within hours. Inside the hospital, Jamal remained on machines. Nurses charted vitals every half hour. At 11 p.m., the log read, "Condition critical, comatose, unresponsive." The next morning at 7 a.m., the medical examiner's report was expected. At 7:03 a.m., the hospital clerk noted, "File missing." The folder containing Jamal's scans and injury chart could not be located. The entry log showed it had been checked out by Officer L. Crane at 6:30 a.m. No return. By noon, the hospital spokesperson announced, "We cannot confirm the extent of his injuries at this time." Reporters pressed, "Where is the report?" No answer followed. Cameras caught the spokesperson closing the door quickly. At 2 p.m., protesters marched down Main Street. They carried enlarged printouts of the CCTV stills. Their voices rose in chants. "Hands up, don't hit." Police formed a line. Batons tapped against shields in rhythm. The air filled with heat and noise. At 4 p.m., Calvin sat in his garage. A fluorescent light hummed above. The workbench was cluttered with tools, a radio silent for once. He opened a wooden box, the hinges creaking. Inside lay a stack of papers, medals, and faded photographs. One photo showed a squad in desert gear, sun glaring behind them. Calvin's younger face was in the middle. Next to him stood another man, arms slung over his shoulder, smiling, dust on his uniform. The caption scribbled in ink read, "Iraq 2004. The name stitched above the other man's chest was clear, Donovan. The same Donovan who now walked free from court, his badge still clipped to his belt, sunglasses hiding his eyes as he smiled at the cameras. The fluorescent light flickered once. Calvin held the photo steady, his hand unmoving. The sound of distant sirens bled through the thin garage walls. The box stayed open. The photo lay under the glow. And in that still frame, the truth was set. One of the three officers, now shielded by the system, had once owed his life to Calvin Harris in war. At 7 a.m., the basement camera in the Harris house clicked on with motion and held. A single bulb threw a cone of light over cinder block walls. A folding table sat under it, metal legs splayed. Calvin Harris moved into frame carrying a roll of masking tape, a stapler, and a stack of printouts. He taped a map of the town to the wall, pushpins punched into intersections. He added a calendar grid with days circled in red. Photos of officers were lined in a row, each labeled with a name scrawled in black marker. A school clock on a nearby shelf showed 7:26 a.m. The camera watched him step back, measure with his hands, adjust the map by an inch, and press the tape flat. By 9 a.m., a hardware store camera recorded him at aisle 12. Gloves went into a basket, a coil of plastic zip ties, a gas can, a painter's mask. He paused at a rack of small tools, took a compact hand saw in its blister pack, and added it. The register camera caught his card swipe. The receipt timestamp read 9:17 a.m. Outside the parking lot, cam followed him to a tan sedan with a missing hubcap. He loaded the trunk, closed it gently, and drove out of frame. At 11:30 a.m., a pawn shop's corner lens saw him enter carrying nothing and leave with a long black case with latches. The clerk counted bills under the counter. The camera had no audio. The case was set on the passenger seat and belted in. The sedan rolled away at 11:42 a.m. In the basement again at 1 p.m., the camera recorded him sorting items across the table. The gloves were lined up. The mask lay on the corner. The black case rested against the wall. He opened a small metal lockbox and dropped in a notebook, then held a pen steady as he wrote along the first page. He closed the box, turned a key, and slipped the key on a chain around his neck. The camera's timestamp ticked through 1:19 p.m. At 3 p.m., the printer in the hallway stuttered sheets. The second-floor hallway cam caught photos sliding into a tray. 3 officers' faces, the alley still frame, the cruiser hood dent. Later, those sheets were taped under the map. In the basement feed at 4:06 p.m., a single name sat centered above the cluster, Donovan. Traffic cameras marked his sedan crossing Main at 5:11 p.m., then turning toward the west side. A dashcam in a parked cruiser near the diner captured the tan sedan circling once, twice, never parking, the driver's face obscured by glare. On Linden, a porch camera recorded the same sedan pass at 6:02 p.m., then again at 6:37 p.m., its brake lights flaring briefly at each stop sign. At 8 p.m., the radio scanner on the kitchen counter hissed and carried routine calls. Noise complaint on 5th. Assist at Walmart lot. Units check-in. At 8:44 p.m., shift rotation posted. Units 9-12. 4 move to night watch. A bulletin board in the station lobby displayed a fresh schedule sheet. The lobby camera saw officers stop, check, and sign. At 9 p.m., Calvin's basement camera recorded his hand draw lines on the calendar, circling 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 1 a.m. He wrote street names in block letters down the notebook's margin. The pen pressed hard enough to score the paper. He placed a small disposable phone beside the lockbox and snapped the lid shut again. By 10:13 p.m., the convenience store on King Street recorded him buying a lighter and 2 bottles of sports drink. The clerk said, "You all right?" He said, "Night drive." The bell over the door chimed as he left. The parking lot cam caught him unscrewing a bottle cap and pouring liquid over the windshield to wipe away dust. He stepped into the driver's seat and watched the road. At 11:06 p.m., a city lot camera behind the diner recorded Unit 12, a white cruiser pulling into the back row. An officer exited, locked the doors, and walked toward the rear entrance for a late plate. The alley camera behind the diner tracked him to the door, then returned to center. The cruiser sat alone under a dim pole light, hood cooling in quiet ticks. Midnight slid under with a low train horn from the south. Sudden movement triggered a camera on a nearby garage. A shadow crossed the lot. The figure wore a hood, gloves, and moved without hurry. The cruiser's rear quarter panel entered the frame. The figure stood beside it for 22 seconds, body blocking the view of the gas door. A shoulder shifted as if lifting and tipping. Camera caught a faint slosh somewhere off-frame, then a small glass clink as something touched metal. The figure stepped away, paused by the windshield, raised a can and sprayed. The aerosol hissed in a short burst. 3 characters took shape in black on glass. 17. The figure moved 2 steps back, lit a flame, and flicked it low. A flash rolled under the chassis. Fire ran hungry under the car. It bloomed at the tires and lifted into the engine bay in seconds. Heat warped air, the image trembling as the metal skin blazed white. A porch camera across the lot recorded the sudden daylight bright flare, then the concussion thump as the front tire burst. The windshield spidered and dropped. The painted number 17 warped in heat until the glass caved completely. An alarm screamed until wires melted and the sound choked off. At 12:07 a.m., the radio lit. Unit 12, vehicle fire, rear lot, requesting engine. Another voice cut in, breathless. Copy. All units, secure your vehicles. Repeat, secure your vehicles. Boots pounded in the diner hallway. The back door burst open. 2 officers halted at the lot's edge as the car gagged smoke into a black column. One shouted, "Back, back." A siren chirped and then roared as the engine from Station 3 rolled in, lights painting the brick. The hose line hissed, water hammered, steam lifted in heavy sheets. The car cooled to a hissing carcass. The hood collapsed into itself. The fire captain said, "Accelerant," while a flashlight traced burn patterns in long, slow arcs. By 12:30 a.m., the lot was taped. Reporters drifted to the edge. A camera zoomed tight on the melted 17 impression at the top of the windshield frame. The anchor's voice later read, "An unknown arsonist targeted a police vehicle." In the locker room at the station, a handheld captured officers snapping open lockers, checking gear, glancing at each other. One said, "Who did this?" Another replied, "Clock your exits." A third muttered, "Watch your 6." At 1 a.m., gas station cameras on the east side tracked Calvin's sedan moving past without stopping. At 1:11 a.m., the same car idled at the corner of Maple and 3rd for a full minute, then turned toward the river, then turned back. The traffic pole camera at Main caught only the roofline and a glint on glass. No plate number was visible. He resumed circuits. At 1:40 a.m., the tan sedan followed, at 2-car length, behind a blue pickup known to belong to one of the 3 officers. The pickup turned toward a side street. The sedan did not turn but continued to the next light, waited, then looped. Street cams connected the movements in a slow mosaic. A clerk at an overnight bakery saw a man in a gray hoodie pause outside, glance at his watch, and move on. The clerk told a reporter he checked the time, that's all. Inside the basement at 2:06 a.m., the camera recorded him writing again. He listed names, times, and places. He drew arrows between addresses and circled them. A small digital recorder lay beside the notebook. He picked it up, spoke a time, and set it down. Every entry ended with a period and a line through it. By 8:30 a.m. The neighborhood east of the station sat quiet. A dog barked once and then stopped. The station's exterior cameras showed the front steps empty, the flag snapping in a light breeze. A pair of late walkers passed and looked once at the doors, then continued along the sidewalk. At 2:41 a.m. a figure appeared at the edge of the main plaza cam, hood drawn, gloves on. The person carried a small bundle wrapped in plastic. The camera watched the figure approach the station's front doors, pause under the floodlight, and kneel. The bundle unwrapped with a quick twist. A single handcuff lay inside, hinged, one shackle clamped around something dark. The figure held it up. The metal shone wet. The other shackle dangled. Figure placed it carefully at the base of the glass, centered beneath the logo on the door, and pressed it until it stood upright. A night clerk across the street, smoking by the service entrance, saw the gesture and dropped his cigarette. "Hey," he called once. The figure did not look over. The clerk's phone camera zoomed with a stutter. The station cam, sharper, captured a closer frame. In the cuff's throat, under the silver curve, a smear of red glistened. Not paint, thick. The clerk whispered, his phone close to his mouth, "That's blood." The figure stepped back, adjusted the angle of the cuff with 2 fingers, and left the frame, head down, walking without hurry. The station doors did not open. The lobby remained empty. The camera held on the cuff. A thin line of red crept from its hinge onto the concrete lip, then dripped, a single bead falling and darkening the stone. A minute passed, then another. At 2:49 a.m. a patrol car pulled to the curb. 2 officers got out, laughing low, carrying paper cups. One reached for the handle. He stopped. The laughter died. He lifted his cup away from the door and said, "Call it in." The other stared at the cuff, the red drip bright under the light. He pulled his radio close. "Station front. We got a delivery." Inside, the lobby camera caught their reflection in the glass, small and distorted by the logo. Outside, the handcuff stood at attention. The drip widened into a thin, dark fan across the threshold. A breeze lifted and set the chain humming faintly against steel. By dawn, photos of the cuff were on every feed. Crowds gathered at the sidewalk tape. A woman asked, "What does it mean?" A man answered, 17. The officers kept them back with a small gesture and no words. The basement camera at the Harris house shut off at 5 a.m. when the sensor timed out. The table remained as it was. The map on the wall held its pins. The lockbox sat closed with its key gone from sight. The black case leaned in shadow. The notebook waited behind steel. On the station steps, the camera continued to hold the frame. The cuff did not move. The smear darkened. The sun cracked the horizon and made the metal flash bright for a second. The camera did not blink. It saw the handcuff and the red. It saw the officers freeze, then scatter. It saw the first war sign placed inches from their door. At 6 p.m. the church parking lot filled in slow pairs, engines ticking as they cooled. Cameras over the side door watched people file in. A man in a reserve jacket with a limp, 2 students with backpacks, 3 mothers carrying folders clutched tight to their chests. The basement light glowed through a small window cut near ground level. A motion detector tripped and held. Inside, folding chairs scraped concrete. Candles were set in glass jars along a prayer rail and lit one by one. Wax pooled and steadied. Hands clasped over knees. No one spoke loud. A phone on a chair edge recorded only breath and the flicker hiss. At 6:19 p.m. a second phone panned the room and caught Calvin Harris at the far wall, his shoulders squared under fluorescent buzz. He unrolled a taped map across a dented metal table. Pins dotted intersections. Names sat on index cards pinned beneath a strip of blue tape. A low voice said, "Lock the door." The latch clicked. A lighter flared and died. The camera held on hands as they reached, met, and gripped. A whisper for him. Another reply for all of them. At 7 p.m. a campus camera tracked the 2 students leaving by the gym. One passed a backpack to the other and nodded at the clock tower. On the feed from a lot across town, reservists in faded caps stood under a streetlight, shoulder to shoulder, speaking short and flat. The audio was wind and shoe scuff. One word reached the mic once, said like an instruction, not a vow. "Quiet." At 8:05 p.m. the ICU hallway lens on the 4th floor caught Alana Harris at the nurse's station asking for a votive. A nurse lifted a small jar from a drawer and set it in her hand. She walked to a chair outside room 416 and lit the candle. The flame caught, wavered, then steadied. The camera zoomed in tight, autofocus breathing over the glass until a single bead of wax swelled and tipped. It slid down the side in slow motion, white against clear, and gathered in a ring at the base. Behind the curtain, machines ticked a regular line across a screen, bright green in a dimmed room. At 8:33 p.m. City Hall's east camera showed a hooded figure tilt a spray can and test a quick puff near the brick. Another figure kept watch at the foot of the steps. The dot of a cigarette glowed and moved. The first line went up in black, clean and fast, a C drawn tall across stone. The can hissed, letter by letter. Calvin Lives formed in a straight band under the second-floor windows. The lookouts pointed once at an approaching patrol, then stepped back into shadow. The siren wailed, cut short, then stopped. The camera held the words as dew formed on the paint and fattened the edges, making them spread. At 9:12 p.m., a backstreet camera outside a laundromat tracked an officer known to run with the three under review. He was alone, jacket collar up against a light wind, a takeout bag swinging from his hand. The alley beside the building opened into a deeper dark where dumpsters hid corners from headlights. He cut that way, quick and familiar. The laundromat lens lost him for 5 seconds, then caught a flash of motion and the bag dropping, food spilling across wet concrete. A second camera above a pawnshop back door watched two figures move as one. A forearm looped around the officer's neck. A second hand grabbed his wrist and levered it high. He went down on one knee and then both. The lens shook when a nearby air unit kicked on and rattled its casing. The officer was turned to face the wall, jaw forced open by fingers pushing into his cheeks. Paper crackled. Pages were shoved between his teeth until they bulged from his mouth. The top sheet flashed an ER stamp and the header line with Jamal Harris in block caps. A staple glinted, then bent, and a thin line of red slipped from his lip as he gagged against the wad. A voice near the lens said two words, plain and low, open wide. The figure with the grip let go suddenly. The officer sagged and rolled onto his back. A gloved hand dragged two fingers through a puddle by the curb, lifted them dripping, and wrote across the cinder block in strokes that arrived slow and deliberate. The alley light flickered as the letters took shape. Justice for 17. The officer's eyes followed the hand, glassy and out of focus. The other figure tossed a small folder at his chest. It split at the corner. Pages feathered and stuck to his shirt. The camera watched the two shadows withdraw in opposite directions. No hurry. Footsteps retreated. A siren bleated once 2 blocks over and quit. At 9:19 p.m., the officer crawled to his knees, yanked the papers from his mouth, and spit fragments red onto the ground. He pressed fingers to the wall smears, then held them up, stunned at the color. He fumbled his radio up to his mouth and managed Garrett Alley by 9th now. The pawnshop lens caught his hand shaking as he pressed the mic again. They got me. The feed switched to black when the night manager, spooked by the siren, hit a wrong switch and killed the monitor. The recording continued to the DVR. At 10 p.m., the City Hall words were photographed by 3 angles. By 10:12 p.m., they were posted to feeds with timestamps and the faint reflection of the person who took each picture captured in the window glass. A woman's voice off camera said, "You see this?" and a man answered, "He's alive." The east camera remained fixed, recording passers-by stopping, pointing, and taking their own shots. A patrol car idled at the curb, lights off. 2 officers stared without talking, hands in jackets, shoulders close but not touching. At 11:03 p.m., the locker room camera inside the precinct door clicked at motion and held. The benches were scattered with open bags. Lockers stood ajar. A line of helmets sat on top like mute heads. 4 officers clustered under a vent that rattled. One wiped his face and said, "Check your mirrors." Another snapped his locker shut, looked at the others, and asked, "Who's leaking?" No one answered. A hand slammed a locker door. Metal rang out and echoed. One of them swore low. Another jammed his key at a lock, missed, tried again, and then hit it. Someone laughed without humor and said, "We're not fine." Silence dropped like a lid. At 11:40 p.m., the ICU hallway saw the candle burn lower. The wax ring thickened. Alana touched the glass as if to steady it, then pulled her hand away when the heat reached her skin. She rubbed her fingers together and watched the light. The camera zoomed again, reflex mechanical. The tiny flame bent in air moved by a nurse walking past, then stood straight. Midnight put a thin, cold sheen on the precinct steps. A gust lifted paper in the empty lobby and sent it skittering against the glass. The security monitor at the front desk ran its 12 squares in a slow cycle. Alley, lot, lobby, hall, jail door, sally port, back stair, equipment cage. Each shifted and returned. The dispatch room sat lit and steady, consoles humming, headsets looped over chair backs. The main clock over the duty sergeant's door ticked over to 12:01 a.m. At 12:12 a.m., a city grid monitor at the utility office showed a demand spike and then a dip in the east quadrant. The tech on duty noted the line, wrote the time, and watched the numbers return to normal. In the same minute, the traffic light at Maple and 3rd blinked through a full cycle with no cars present. At 12:31 a.m., a camera above a church basement stairwell recorded the last chair scraping as it was folded. Hands stacked candles into a crate, one still burning, smaller than before. The door at the top of the stairs opened to a slice of streetlight and then shut again. The latch clicked. The room went dark. At 12:47 a.m., a marked unit rolled past City Hall and slowed. A hand held a phone out the window and filmed the graffiti. The words shone slick under the street lamp. A voice in the car said, "Cover it." Another voice said, "In the morning." The car moved on. At 1:05 a.m., the alley behind the pawnshop flashed red as a patrol eased in and stopped where the officer had fallen. The camera from the laundromat showed 2 more cars pulled to the curb and idle. Flashlights combed the cracks. A tech in a vest collected pages and bagged them, the hospital stamp visible through plastic. Someone took photos of the words on the wall. The slow drip below the final 7 hardened and no longer moving. A rookie gagged and turned away, hand on his knee. A sergeant said, "Breathe." At 1:32 a.m., a group of parents of prior cases stood at the end of Main. They did not chant. They faced the station in silence. Phones stayed down. The city cam 2 blocks away picked them up as a static line of dark shapes beneath lamps making yellow pools on concrete. At 1:50 a.m., the locker room camera saw steam curl from a shower and fade. A hand wiped a mirror and left a streak. 2 officers sat on the bench without gear. One spoke without looking up. "Watch your back." The other nodded, eyes on the floor. Someone at the end of the row opened a locker and found a photo slipped into the seam of the door. The dented cruiser hood, Jamal's blood across steel, timestamp in the corner. He stared and said nothing. He slid the photo into his pocket and closed the door. At 2 a.m., the dispatchers rotated. Coffee cups were exchanged. A yawn snapped shut. The main board showed routine calls stacked and cleared. A cursor blinked at an empty field and then moved on. A second board showed the city feeds in small windows. One flickered and resolved. At 2:11 a.m., the first outage hit. It was small, a hiccup. The lobby lights dipped and came back. A clerk looked up and then resumed typing. The security monitors rolled once through their cycle and held an extra beat on the lot camera. A faint high tone played from somewhere off to the left and then stopped. At 2:13 a.m., the building dropped into black. Every light went off at once. Consoles clicked dead. The hum ceased. The dispatch room went from glow to void. Chairs scraped. Someone said, "Generator." Another voice answered on it. A flashlight popped and scanned faces into brief ghost masks, then lowered to the key panel for the backup. The panel showed power. The key turned. The generator coughed and caught. Emergency strips came up in dull red along the floor. The monitors stayed dark. At 2:14 a.m., all at the same second, every screen in the building flickered on. Not the feeds, not the maps. A single line of text appeared on each, white on black, blinking in time to an unheard metronome. It said only 2 words, "War begins." The letters pulsed on the dispatch wall. They filled the booking desk screen. They sat on the locker room TV, reflected in stainless. They repeated on the lobby kiosk where citizens paid tickets. They replaced the jail door camera with bold white light. In the evidence cage, a tiny monitor that usually showed a still image of shelves now showed only those words, the glare bright enough to throw the shadow of a chain-link grid across the floor. The message did not scroll. It did not move. It burned in place. Radios chirped at different pitches and then settled. An officer in the hall tried a door and found it unpowered and locked. The duty sergeant barked, "Get me IT." Down the corridor, a printer came alive and spit a single blank page onto the carpet. In the lobby, the glass doors reflected the words back on themselves to make a second ghost line that hovered over the seal. At 2:16 a.m., the phones in dispatch rang all at once and then stopped, all at the same slice of time, the sound cut by silence that felt like a held breath. The generator throbbed. The letters on the screens kept blinking. No other images returned, only the two words, "War begins." By 6 p.m., the courthouse steps held a wall of bodies and signs, shoulder to shoulder, a slow tide of movement caught by every news camera on Main. Metal barricades funneled the crowd into lanes. A drone buzzed low, its four rotors whining as it steadied above the flag. Reporters stood on milk crates for height. The rotunda camera over the front doors panned across faces and banners and settled on the line of deputies posted just inside, helmets on hip, batons looped. The public hearing was marked open in block letters on the lobby monitor. At 7 p.m., the judge entered from the side door. The gallery stood, sat, and then rose again when the chief took a seat at the defense table with counsel at his right shoulder. Phones lifted and recorded. The bailiff barked, "No recording." Lenses kept rolling anyway. The gavel hit once. The microphones on each table glowed a faint green. The prosecutor read a short statement into the record. "Review ongoing. Bodycam data incomplete. Internal." The defense leaned into a mic and said, "Our clients will cooperate." From outside, the chant came through the walls, a steady thrum that made the hanging lights tremble. 17, 17. At 8:43 p.m., a woman fainted near the fountain. EMTs pushed a gurney through a seam in the crowd. The overhead camera in the vestibule caught the doors sliding open, a spill of night air, and the wall of sound that came with it. In the courtroom, the chief took off his jacket and folded it over the chair back. A closed lens showed sweat at his collar. He tapped his pen once. The judge called a recess. The gavel fell again. The feed cut to a seal. Outside, the crowd surged and then compressed, police radios clattering on belts as a second shift took the line. By 10 p.m., the courthouse lights burned hard and white. The crowd thinned to a knot that refused to leave. The front doors locked. Officers cleared the interior corridor. News trucks idled along the curb, dishes up, cables taped across sidewalk seams. A live streamer in a black hoodie set a phone on a small tripod and angled it toward the marble steps. "We're live," he said, voice low, and the chat counter ticked upward. At 10:57 p.m., a delivery van rolled into the alley behind the courthouse. The rear lot camera saw its brake lights bloom, then dim. The van door slid open. Four figures stepped down, hoods up, gloves on, faces in shadow. One carried a black case. Another carried a coil of rope and a small crowbar. They moved along the loading dock wall, staying under the spill of shadow thrown by a large HVAC box. The service door had a keypad. The second figure keyed something into it. The red light stayed red. The first figure opened the black case and removed a compact saw, its battery already clipped. The blade whined, high and bright. Sparks skittered like fireflies along the threshold as the metal strike plate shaved thin. The door gave a cough and opened an inch. A gloved hand slid a plastic wedge into the gap. The rest pushed in. At 11:06 p.m., the corridor motion sensor tripped. The interior camera blinked awake and showed a long, empty hall. The lens did not catch anyone. 3 seconds later, its view washed out white and returned to black with static fizzing at the bottom. The recorder stamped the word "signal loss" and stored the block. The alarms did not sound. The panel had been cut from the feed. At 11:14 p.m., the group moved through the records room. A night clerk in headphones typed, unaware, the bass line from her screen flickering in her glasses. The camera over her desk caught a reflection in glass, four dark shapes sliding past the stacks. The door into the gallery swung once and settled on its hinge. The group entered the courtroom from the rear and vanished into wings of shadow behind the last row of seats. At 11:22 p.m., smoke began as a thin ribbon under the door of a utility closet near the west stairwell. A janitor turned the knob and jerked his hand back at the heat. He keyed his radio. "Fire, West Hall." Sirens keened in the distance and then zeroed in, their sound stacking over itself until the glass in the trophy case hummed. Two officers ran with extinguishers. A third ran to the alarm pull and yanked it. The bell's clang bled into the siren's wail until the whole building sounded like metal being torn. The live stream at the steps showed smoke ghosting the upper windows. Comment counters climbed. A voice said, "They said it." At 11:29 p.m., the courtroom doors blew inward with a crack of wood. Smoke rolled along the floor in a low tide. The camera mounted high above the seal flicked from idle to record and found Calvin Harris in the aisle, shoulders squared, a mask pulled down around his neck, eyes forward. Behind him moved three others. One held a handheld camera turned outward for the stream. Another held a cloth-wrapped length of pipe. The fourth carried nothing but a coil of rope. They stepped into view like a diagram being revealed. The chief stood at the defense table, hand flat. Two deputies reached for calves and hands, but the smoke pulled their attention sideways as alarms and voices tangled. Calvin walked to the well and stopped. The lens above him stayed wide. He said nothing. The chief looked at him and spoke first, voice loud against the hard walls, the microphones picking up the words and feeding them to the room speakers at a slight delay that made them feel doubled. "You think this is justice?" Calvin's answer was clear and level, the mic catching every syllable. "You broke my son. Now choke on his name." A bench in the back row flipped and skittered on its feet. A bottle hit marble and shattered into a starburst of glass that scrabbled across the aisle. Someone coughed out a laugh and then choked. The handheld stream jittered as its operator backpedaled to catch the room and the faces in one frame. The chat counter spilled upwards. The word "live" glowed in the top left corner and would not dim. At 11:33 p.m. the first pane gave. Gallery window shattered outward into the rotunda. Air rushed, smoke thickened, and the sirens from outside roared louder as if poured straight into the room. A deputy swung a baton and caught nothing but seat back. Another grabbed Calvin's arm and got rope instead. The second figure looped it and pulled, the move clean and practiced. The chief knocked the rope away and reached back toward his holster. Empty. Standard court rules left guns with bailiffs. His hand came up with nothing. He backed once into the table, disturbed, then stood again. A flare of flame licked the ceiling near the west door and smeared black along plaster. A sprinkler coughed and then caught, raining a hard silver into the smoke and steam. The room's audio became a crush of hammers. Alarm, sirens, boots, glass, water like gravel on steel. The front doors crashed as protesters pressed against the barricades and then through. The rotunda camera bobbed as someone bumped the mount. A stream cut in from that angle and then another from a phone held overhead, its operator shouting, "Inside, inside," as the screen smeared with smoke. The comments filled with a single ascending line, "We see you." At 11:36 p.m. a deputy lunged at Calvin. A hand from behind pulled the deputy short by his belt, yanked him off balance, and set him down hard. The chief and Calvin stood 3 paces apart. Water turned the floor into a shallow river that carried slivers of glass toward the rail and into the well. A phone slid past in its clear case, light still on, camera still filming. Its lens caught the 2 men in its spill, one in a dark shirt, one in a suit, both soaked, both framed in red light that pulsed with the outside sirens. Calvin lifted his hand. It held a compact black object wrapped in tape. The lens above the seal zoomed. The shape resolved as a short-barreled handgun, its gloss dulled by the tape. A deputy shouted, "Drop it." His voice broke. The chief stepped forward once and stopped. His chest rose and fell. He said nothing. The handheld stream shifted to the chief's face. Across the country, screens filled with the same close-up. Water ran from his hairline and dripped off his jaw. At 11:38 p.m. the east windows blew with a low boom and a hot rush. Glass hailed down on the bench tops. The community outside roared. The building shook once and then settled. The live stream microphone screamed with feedback and then steadied. Calvin lifted the gun higher, not shaking. The lens tightened another click. The words on the chat scrolled too fast to read. The roving cam from the back caught the chief as he squared his shoulders and put his hands out, palms empty, not raised. At 11:39 p.m. a single shot cracked. The report snapped through water and siren and turned the room into a blank white sound. The muzzle flash kicked against smoke and disappeared. For 3 frames the live stream showed only static. When the image returned, the chief stood exactly where he had been, water drumming his suit, eyes fixed. Behind him, the wall wore a fresh, bright crater, plaster powdered around a hole the size of a coin. The courtroom lens centered on it. It zoomed slowly, one motor whir step at a time, past the chief's ear, past the dripping edge of the seal, past the tear in paint where heat had curled it back. It stopped with the bullet head filling the frame, copper bright, buried deep, the spiral of its metal gleaming in the strobe of the emergency lights. Outside, the rotunda camera captured the crowd's intake of breath as the sound reached them half a beat late. Inside, every phone watched the same thing. Every stream cut to the wall without being told. The nation saw the exact distance between a man's skull and the hole it could have been. No one spoke. The shot's echo finished its slow lap and died. The bullet did not move. The zoom held. Water streaked below it like rain under a low eave. The alarms kept hammering their red pulse. The chief did not turn. The image stayed tight. The chat counters kept rising. The next move had not yet come. At 8:12 a.m. the monitor in room 416 went flat. The tone that followed was steady, not rising, not falling. Nurses pushed through the curtain, pressed pads to chest, counted aloud, then stopped. A doctor pulled the sheet over Jamal Harris's face at 8:19 a.m. The hallway camera recorded Alana Harris collapsing into two arms as a nurse caught her. Calvin Harris stood with his back to the wall. He did not move. The lens did not blink. By 10 a.m., the funeral home released a notice. Service set for Saturday at Mount Zion Baptist. At 11 a.m., the first flowers arrived, lilies wrapped in cellophane placed at the church steps. A boy laid a basketball down beside them. The camera at the intersection tracked people pausing, setting candles, walking away. By 3 p.m., the steps were a field of glass jars, their flames trembling in lines. At 9 a.m. Saturday, the sanctuary filled beyond capacity. Fans whirred in the rafters. Folding chairs lined the aisles. The camera mounted above the choir loft panned slowly and caught rows of dark suits, pressed uniforms, women fanning themselves with programs. At 10:06 a.m. the casket arrived, draped in white cloth. The pallbearers set it on brass rails. A choir sang low. At 10:44 a.m. the casket lid closed for the last time. Calvin walked behind, one hand on the rail, Alana beside him. The camera over the pulpit held still as they exited. By 12 p.m. the street outside was blocked. Thousands had gathered. Banners rose. Signs read 17. Police cars idled 3 blocks away but never approached. The crowd moved as one, the drone feed from above showing a river of people down Main, shoulder to shoulder, sound building into a chant that carried into every alley. From the air, the mass looked like a dark spine cutting the city in half. The chant was captured clear on multiple live microphones. Justice for Jamal. At 4 p.m. fires broke in the industrial quarter. A feed from a warehouse camera showed sparks at the window, then full blaze rolling through rafters. Sirens wailed. Units were dispatched but never reached. By nightfall, the city skyline carried 3 black plumes. Helicopter cams captured the shadows as they bent in wind. At 6 p.m. the police precinct stood empty. Interior cameras recorded nothing. The last frame on the jail hall lens showed cell doors open, keys abandoned on the floor. The evidence cage door swung wide, chain broken. The duty desk phone rang until its battery died. By 8 p.m. crowds moved past the darkened station. A phone camera showed them pressing spray cans to walls, lines forming fast. A time-lapse posted later revealed the entire facade covered in black letters by dawn. Words repeated in layers: 17, justice; war, Calvin lives. At 10 p.m. a mural began on King and Linden, the corner where Jamal had been thrown against steel. The first strokes were black outlines by a masked artist. By 2 a.m. the paint had spread into full color. Jamal in jersey, ball cradled under one arm, gaze lifted. Spotlights set by the crowd lit the wall. A drone hovered to capture it. The footage cut into national broadcasts by morning. The mural was 14 feet tall, visible from blocks away. By Sunday, the skyline was a palimpsest of smoke and flame. The courthouse dome stood blackened. The city hall doors were barred, Calvin lives still visible above the lintel. Across the city, porch cameras caught candles being lit on stoops, one flame becoming 5, 5 becoming dozens. From the air, the city glowed in pinpricks of orange. At 11 p.m., a camera on the church roof caught the front steps crowded again. Hundreds knelt in silence. A sea of candles spread across stone, wax dripping down in thick white rivers. The cross at the top of the church glowed faint in haze. A bell tolled once, then again, each strike swallowed by the noise of helicopters above. The lens zoomed until only the flames were visible, their glass shells trembling in wind. At midnight, the broadcast tower carried one last image. The mural, the crowd, the skyline smudged in black haze. Over it, the words stamped in silence. And from that night on, his name was no longer just a name. It was a warning.